Hello, welcome to Health Styles Market. My name is Arliss, and today we're going to talk about highly sensitive people. It's a common subject. Hopefully you listened to the intro, but if you didn't, welcome. We're going to dig a little deeper into highly sensitive people. Of the population of 100, only up to about 20% would be diagnosed as highly sensitive people, meaning the other 80% are sensitive, but they're not highly sensitive. So we're going to talk more and more about that. So first I want to give you a little self-test, and I'm going to read these questions and you can ponder them over. I do want to let you know that Crystal is going to post these documents at the bottom in the description, and you can click on that and that'll take you to a website where you can print these. You can either do that at the stop the video now and go do that and print it so you can follow along, or you can wait and print these all out and make your own little class binder kind of setup if you want to dig into this deeper. So if you remember last time when we talked about this, what people think being a highly sensitive person is, and there are two big words to describe a highly sensitive person, is they're highly emotional and highly irrational, which tends to sound like a criticism or certainly a negative. And so I'm going to dig into this subject with you until you become aware that what really, truly it means to be a highly sensitive person is this whole big balance. And so some of those traits are empathetic, a deep listener, excellent with language, intuitive, that's a biggie, a deep thinker, deep belief in justice, creative, deeply spiritual, detail-oriented, a visionary, deep feeler, and an acute awareness of subtleties. So let's talk about this quiz. The highly sensitive person, now this is from an adult perspective. Are you a highly sensitive person? Answer each question according to the way you personally feel. Check the box if it's at least somewhat true for you, and leave it unchecked if it's not very true or not true at all. So I'll just read through these. I am easily overwhelmed by strong sensory input. I seem to be aware of subtleties in my environment. Other people's moods affect me. I tend to be very sensitive to pain. I find myself needing to withdraw during busy days into bed or into a darkened room or any place where I can have some privacy and relief from stimulation. I am particularly sensitive to the effects of caffeine. I am easily overwhelmed by things like bright lights, strong smells, coarse fabrics, or sirens close by. I have a rich, complex inner life. I am made uncomfortable by loud noises. I'm deeply moved by the arts or music. My nervous system sometimes feels so frazzled that I just have to go off by myself. I'm conscientious. I startle easily. I get rattled when I have a lot to do in a short amount of time. When people are uncomfortable in a physical environment, I tend to know what needs to be done to make it more comfortable, like changing the lighting or the seating. I am annoyed when people try to get me to do too many things at once. I try hard to avoid making mistakes or forgetting things. I make it a point to avoid violent movies and TV shows. I become unpleasantly aroused when a lot is going on around me, usually irritation or anger. Being very hungry creates a strong reaction in me, disrupting my concentration or my mood. Changes in my life shake me up. I notice and enjoy delicate or fine scents, tastes, sounds, and works of art. I find it unpleasant to have a lot going on at once. I make it a high priority to arrange my life to avoid upsetting or overwhelming situations. I am bothered by intense stimuli like loud noises or chaotic scenes. When I must compete or be observed while performing a task, I become so nervous or shaky that I do much worse than I would otherwise. When I was a child, my parents or teachers seemed to see me as sensitive or shy. If you answered more than 14 of the questions as true of yourself, you are probably highly sensitive. If fewer questions are true for you, but extremely true, that might also justify calling you highly sensitive. So let's read the highly sensitive child quiz. Answer each question as best as you can. Check the box if it is true or at least moderately true of your child or was for a substantial time in the past. Leave unchecked if it is not true or not at all true for your child. My child startles easily, complains about scratchy clothing, seams in socks, or labels against his or her skin. The reason I kind of love that one is because I'm highly sensitive, but also I am absolutely positively sure that it was a highly sensitive person that created clothing without labels. And most of us love that. On to the questions. Doesn't usually enjoy big surprises. Learns better from a gentle correction than a strong punishment. Seems to read my mind. Uses big words for his or her age. Notices the slightest unusual odor. Has a clever sense of humor. Seems very intuitive. Is hard to get to sleep after an exciting day. Doesn't do well with big changes. Wants to change clothes if they get wet or sandy. Asks lots of questions. Is a perfectionist. Notices the distress of others. Prefers quiet play. Asks deep, thought-provoking questions. Is very sensitive to pain. Is bothered by noisy places. Notices subtleties, sometimes something that's been moved, a change in a person's appearance, etc. Considers if it's safe before climbing high. Performs best when strangers aren't present, and feels things deeply. If you answered 13 or more of the questions as true of your child is probably highly sensitive. If one or two are true for your child, but extremely true, that might also justify calling your child highly sensitive. So part of what we're wanting to do is learn more about this subject, because if we or our family members are highly sensitive, we want to be supportive of them and help them grow and learn, help them accept this trait until they really are happy and satisfied and thriving in their pathway of life. So I want to mention some highly sensitive people, and most of these are familiar and famous. So we've got Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Nicole Kidman, Steve Martin, Glenn Close, Barbra Streisand, Elton John, Michael Jackson, Katharine Hepburn, Judy Garland, Mozart, Albert Einstein, Abraham Lincoln, and I need to handwrite on here, Elon Musk. So it lets you know that these are not sitting in a corner, not able to speak, so tightly wound inside of themselves. These are people that maybe you didn't know. Maybe that kind of surprises you that those are in the category of highly sensitive people. There's also careers that highly sensitive people are commonly drawn to, especially if they're really listening to their heart, listening to their intuition, and they'll be drawn because this uses their gifts. So a list of some of these careers are artists, musicians, writers, teachers, doctors, healers, lawyers, scientists, philosophers, ministers, entrepreneurs, poets, craftsmen, and obviously movie stars. So it gives you a little bit more positive. And now let me read you a mom's testimonial that I found this week on highly sensitive people. And this is something she posted on Facebook. She called it Growin' and Flowin'. And she shows a young man, he happens to be 20 years old, standing in front of a home that's new to him. She says, "This is my 20-year-old son standing in front of his two-family house that he just bought. All through school, he didn't have much in common with many of the kids. He didn't like sports. He was very quiet. He didn't have many friends. He didn't get invited to birthday parties, pre-prom parties, end-of-the-year parties, or Sweet 16 parties. He never went to watch school sporting events. He actually never said anything about not being included or invited anywhere. Looking back, I think it bothered me a lot more than it bothered him. Any club or group I signed him up for, he just didn't like. He felt he just didn't click with the other kids in the group. He cried the first day of kindergarten. He cried when I signed him up for summer camp. So every summer, he worked with my husband. He would leave the house at 7 a.m. and coming home at 7 p.m. each day. He started his own business, plowing driveways and cutting lawns in our town before he could even drive. All he liked to do was work. He worked with my husband from when he was 5 years old, and still does. I always worried about him socially and worried about him not being included and not having a lot of friends. He always liked being with adults. Here he is at 20 years old, and he just bought a house. He runs his own excavation business and is a foreman for our company. To say I'm proud is definitely an understatement. To all you mamas out there with a child like my son, please remind yourself every day, it's okay if sports are not your thing. It's okay to not have a lot of friends. Football games and social things are not for everyone, and neither is college. They will find their way, and they will be okay. And so because he's okay, no, mama is okay. And that's not my son. Okay, so let's talk about highly sensitive people. Crybaby, scaredy cat, don't be a spoilsport. What's the matter with you? You're just too sensitive for your own good. If these phrases sound familiar, you're in the right place. If you have heard a lot of that, it may have made you feel that there must be something very different about you. So I've mentioned last time about highly sensitive people, and Dr. Elaine Aron coined that term. And so this is what she said about herself. I was convinced that I had a fatal flaw that I had to hide, and that it doomed me to a second-rate life. I thought there really was something wrong with me. Can you check out there? High sensitivity, what is it? It's a personality trait. It's someone who has a very sensitive nervous system. That means they process information from the senses more deeply and more thoroughly than a non-sensitive person. This leads to keen awareness. They notice many, many details and subtleties that others may not, and they think about these details. They cannot turn off this constant awareness of the world around them, nor of their inner world of thoughts and feelings. 2, they have intense experiencing. One doctor online calls it they are deeply feeling kids. I love that phrase. Intense experiencing. They feel very, very intensely. It's like they have an inner intensity dial that's turned up several notches beyond the setting for a non-highly sensitive person. 3, overload. All of this awareness and intensity is exhausting. It's easy for them to become overwhelmed. They then feel the overpowering need to stop the overload. They may rail against what's wearing them out, or they may withdraw quietly into themselves, or they may walk away to find a quiet space and zone out for a bit. The highly sensitive person has a nervous system that is much more sensitive. That is not nicer or better, it's just a bit different. That doesn't mean that others are insensitive, they just simply are not highly sensitive. So going back to we've got a count of 100 people, up to 20% at the max would potentially be highly sensitive people, but that also means there's 80% that are not. So it's not that they're insensitive, they're just simply not highly sensitive. So if you remember, this is the way I like to think of it. They're a person with a high IQ, a sensitive soul, and a too thin veil. What does that mean? They're highly aware, and they're often, most often, usually always, affected by all things that assault the senses. So especially the five senses, so sight and taste and touch and hearing and smell. So when those are assaulted, then they're very aware of this too thin veil, and they don't feel protected, they don't feel safe, they don't feel comfortable, and they need to be taught to learn how to increase their veil so they do feel protected, even if it's chaotic or noisy or a lot going on or feeling like there's a lot of things coming at them at once. Examples of things that seem to affect a highly sensitive person the most. So these are kind of their kryptonite. Loud noises, bright lights, strong smells, rough textures or scratchy clothing, tastes, emotions, violent movies, temperature changes, sensitive to pain or pain intolerance, overwhelmed by time pressures, trouble screening out stimuli, and uncomfortable with changes in their lives or when changes need to be made. And I would add to that, anything that comes as a surprise is really often hard for highly sensitive people. The onslaught of these things can feel like an assault to a highly sensitive person, and they can quickly become overwhelmed, stressed, exhausted, or react defensively. So now we're talking about the ratio. So this isn't a gender thing, that highly sensitive people are more often female than male, though in our culture in the US, I would say females are more quickly able to accept this diagnosis and work with it. It's hard. It's not highly respected for men, and yet you'll notice in the list of people, of famous people, that I had almost equal names that were male and female. So this idea that it's only girls, yeah, that's a myth. It's men and boys and women and girls. So then there's this perception that, well, you know, you're going to know because the highly sensitive people are going to be shy, timid, introverted, or quiet, and that all of those people are highly sensitive. No, that's not true either. Up to 30% of highly sensitive people are actually extroverts. So you can't just tell by those qualities. But I can tell you this, coming to understand the trait of being a highly sensitive person can transform your life or their life, or both is even better. So in this context, during this class, I'm going to use two little children to give you some perspective of what life is like as a highly sensitive person. And I want to remind you that we don't grow out of this trait. We are a highly sensitive person from birth to death. So let's introduce Arthur. He's a highly sensitive person, and he embodies many of the traits of high sensitivity. Catherine is his older sister, and she isn't highly sensitive. She's a non-highly sensitive child. So their ages are, Arthur is kindergarten, first grade kind of thing, and Catherine is a couple years older. Arthur is generally a quiet boy. He doesn't like to make a lot of noise and fuss. He does not like big changes or sudden shocks, and he may jump at the slightest things. He picks up on the tiny details, like mom's changed the air freshener or dad's belt is upside down. He does not love coarse textures against his skin. He needs his socks to be on perfectly straight or they bother him. When he falls and skins his knee, it really, really hurts. Sometimes the world just gets to be too much, and Arthur melts down, crying, raging, climbing the walls through overstimulation. People say of Arthur that he's old beyond his years. He has an impressive vocabulary. He asks clever questions. He makes adults laugh. He likes everything just so. He is also remarkably perceptive about what other people are thinking or feeling, and Arthur is thoughtful. Before diving into a new situation, Arthur holds back and weighs up his options. He is at his best when people treat him with respect and guide him gently. So in the next series, as I add to this, we'll be talking more about Arthur and Catherine, and we'll be talking about them in different situations, and what they notice, how they feel, how they behave, what it feels like to them, and what it means to them. So that's all for today. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening and sharing, and we'll look forward to being together at the next one. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye.